I'm lost. I'm sad. No. You're evolving. I'm so in my feels right now. I'm uncomfortable. Why do I feel this way? I am powerful. I am courageous. I am worthy. I have decided to prioritize self-love because depression is too great a burden.
Is this it? Life? Just anger, just frustration, sadness? I can't breathe. This weight on my chest, it hurts. Is this it? I failed this thing called life. I failed it. But have I? Can I get out of this? Am I good enough to get out of this? Is it even worth it? Should I give up my dreams? Can my dreams come true? Is this it?
In order to be clinically diagnosed with depression or major depressive disorder, MDD, you need to experience 5 of 9 symptoms. A depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Diminished interest or pleasure in all or most of the activities that used to bring you enjoyment. Significant weight loss or weight increase in regards to your diet. Insomnia, hyperinsomnia. Hyperinsomnia is when you're sleeping too much as opposed to insomnia where you're not sleeping enough or really at all. Then we have psychomotor retardation or psychomotor agitation. Psychomotor retardation is when you're kind of moving in slow motion, really. Psychomotor agitation is when you're moving more rapidly, like quickly, abnormally for both. Then we have feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. Then we have diminished ability to concentrate or really think in general. Then we have thoughts of suicidality or having a plan or intention, really. And those are the 9 symptoms. And that's what they call a depressive episode. And if you experience a depressive episode within that 2-week time frame, you are clinically diagnosed with depression for the most part.
I think it's interesting because, like, for myself and, like, the common person, like, you don't really think of all those symptoms to really even diagnose yourself, you know, that you're depressed. I think that the common person, including myself before I knew like the actual definition of it, you tie depression with being an overwhelming negative feeling, whether it's frustration or again being overwhelmed or anger and obviously sadness. So it's actually interesting that professionally or clinically you have to have 5 out of those 9 symptoms to be depressed. So what is your experience with depression per se?
So when I think about like depression or like I guess the first time I was ever depressed, I legit think back to high school. I was kicking it with this girl who I really liked, and long story short, it didn't work out. And I remember feeling just so freaking sad. And I remember that when it happened, we were taking a drive from New York to Virginia, and that's an 8-hour drive, and I literally cried the entire ride. Like that's wild. I was probably like 15 at the time, and I didn't really put together like, hey, I'm depressed. It was more like I'm sad. Not until recently did I really start reflecting, like analytically reflecting on what it means to be depressed, and like what was it like my first time being depressed? How did I cope with it? From my understanding, what I believe is that depression for me is in regards to interpersonal relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or like a friendship, like any form of intimacy, relationships in general. I find myself being dependent on that other person. I depend on them to make me happy. In the long run, that's makes me depressed.
I think the first time I felt like real symptoms of depression, like sadness, obviously the biggest one, definitely when my grandfather was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and then unfortunately a couple years down the road he passed away. So when I think back, that's like, I think my only, I wouldn't say real sadness, because you could be sad about a lot of things, but I think it was the most extreme and definitely the most memorable sadness that you, like one of those that you obviously remember for the rest of your life. But a constant stem of my symptoms of depression, because I wouldn't be comfortable per se saying I was depressed, but I've definitely experienced symptoms of depression. Those feelings of sadness and depression have come from me feeling like I've been a failure, or I've not really accomplished my goals, or not going in the right direction, or maybe giving up on something I was really passionate about. Personally, for me, like an in-your-face sadness or symptoms of depression has obviously in my life been my grandfather, but something that you have to look back on and be like, oh, okay, that's why I was feeling like that, is definitely feelings of failure and self-doubt. And yeah, that's my personal experience on that. So it's interesting that we have like similarities, but it's like different at the same time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and to speak more on the similarities, I think for me it happens to be with relationships, like interpersonal relationships. For you, it's intrapersonal relationships, with like the relationship with yourself, when it comes to feeling like you haven't met the goals you have for yourself, in regards to be feeling like a failure. I think that's what's so interesting about depression, is kind of like you have like the clinical definition of it, and then you have like a subjective definition of it. But to an extent, I mean, we can all relate to what depression is, you know, like we have different definitions, but to an extent we all kind of know it's like a form of sadness, or respectively hopelessness.
And we also, obviously, in the beginning of the video, we got into poems. So how did you express yourself via your poem?
My poem was just like an expression of like my cognition, what I'm thinking and kind of feeling when I'm feeling depressed or sad. I started off with like, I'm lost and I'm sad, and feeling lost for me is like feeling disoriented. You don't really know what to do, and at the same time you're feeling sad, which is facilitating you not knowing what to do. But at the same time, there's this other part of me that's saying, embrace this, because you're evolving, you're growing from this, you're learning something. But at the same time, part of that is like this idea of acceptance, where you're in your feelings, and it's uncomfortable, especially if they're feelings of vulnerability, really. By exploring it, I was able to come to the conclusion that I'm powerful, and depression is something that has helped me to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable in order to prioritize my happiness.
Like for me, with the poem, I would say like it was just feelings, you know, it was just thoughts. Like it was like, what are you thinking throughout those negative emotions? You know, it gets kind of deep, like, is this life? Like, because when you're in that moment, like you tend to forget the joyful moments and the happiness.
For sure.
You know? At the same time, like writing that and kind of just realizing and accepting that that's how I felt at some point is kind of, you know, helps you positively. It helps you grow from that. The beauty of going through something like that is being able to grow from it. And I know, like, what is your positive outtake from your poem and your experiences?
So what I've learned from, you know, experiencing symptoms of depression, or, you know, my depressive endeavor, is that I am powerful, and that I've learned that through my depression, I've learned to prioritize my happiness.